If someone had told me earlier that I would witness a grown man slapping his wife in public, and even at some poorly set table, I would have twisted my finger at my temple. I mean, who normal man would do that? And now imagine, guests' wine is flowing, meat is smoking on the plates, and the husband, not thinking long, in front of everyone beats his wife for the fact that she put the forks wrong. To say that I was shocked is to say nothing. But what happened next is what I still see in my mind's eye. You know, they say that every patient woman has her limit. Well, Anna's limit came for a reason. When she stood up, calmly looked at Ivan as if he was nothing, and began to tell the guests something that made him lower his eyes and literally get out of the house, I realized that this would be the evening that we would all remember for the rest of our lives. And so I'm here to tell you how one man became a laughingstock in front of everyone, and his wife showed that she had so much hidden behind her soul that even I, her friend, had no idea.
Thank you for watching my channel. I create videos for your enjoyment. Please subscribe if you want to support my efforts, it's very important to me. I apologize in advance for any mistakes, dubbing is done by neural network. Please point out mistakes in the comments so I can correct them.
So we were going to dinner. We gathered at Ivan and Anna's place for dinner. Well, as usual, the occasion, is not important, the main thing, the reason for the company and food on the table. Anna was rushing around the kitchen, trying to please everyone, and Ivan was sitting in the chair and commanding, as usual. You know, that typical look of the master of the house, who decides everything with a gesture or a word. Here he is sitting, and it is obvious that he is already dissatisfied with something, although it would seem all the conditions have been created. The table is set, the appetizers are in place, the guests have gathered. But this evening Anna, apparently, was already on the verge of walking. And I noticed it, there was some tension in her, as if she was trying to keep everything under control, although every time Ivan grumbled something, and it happened every 5 minutes, her left hand twitched. We didn't mind, after all, who is the perfect host. But Ivan's standards for quality were apparently too high. In the middle of the evening, when half of the bottles were already empty and the hot meal had not yet been served, Ivan suddenly noticed that the forks on the table were not where they should be. Well, what do you think? Instead of just saying it in a whisper or correcting it in any civilized way, he stands up abruptly from his chair and slams his palm on the table. There's silence in the room for a second, and I'm sitting there like everyone else, not sure what's going on. And he, pointing at Anna, with a smile that could be described as venomous, throws, "Can't you do normal at all?" Everyone fell silent, no one expecting anything serious to follow, until suddenly, there was a slap. Have you ever seen a slap in front of a guest? It's like an explosion in the middle of a peaceful evening. The noise, the rumble, and the silence, crushing like an earthquake. And Natalia. She didn't even flinch at first, just looked at him in a way that sent shivers down my spine. Well, if I had known then that Anna would bring all the dirty secrets of their family life right out into the light, maybe I would have prepared myself in advance. But no, friends, this was the beginning of the end for Ivan. Everyone sat on pins and needles. The faces of the guests changed. Someone just didn't know where to put his eyes. Someone tried to pretend that nothing terrible had happened, and I already realized that this was not the case when you can just continue the dinner and forget. Anna stood there panting, her eyes staring straight into the void, but I knew her well enough to know that she was about to make a decision, and if she made it, everything would go to hell. And then she turned to us, the guests. She smiled, not her usual soft smile, but a new, evil one. And there was so much hidden in that smile that Ivan, who was already beginning to be proud of his prank, suddenly tensed up. He had thought that everything was under control. He thought that now Anna would recover, cover up the situation, and everything would go back to business as usual. But it didn't. She calmly sighed, fixed her hair as if nothing terrible had happened, and said, "Well, since Ivan decided to show everyone what a master he is, let me tell you how he copes with this role at home in reality." Ivan turned pale. I saw him clench his fists sharply. The guests looked at each other. No one realized what was about to happen. "You all think Ivan is the king here, don't you?" She continued, and you could hear the restrained fury in her voice. "Well, I'm going to tell you something he'll never tell you. Do you know how hard it is to be the wife of a man who behaves differently behind closed doors than he does in front of you? Yes, dear friends, our Ivan is not the hero he tries to make himself out to be." She looked at him. "Let's start with his wonderful fishing trips." Yes, fishing trips. You think I didn't know that? All those late returns home, your shirt smelling of other people's perfume. You should at least bring fish with you sometime to make the legend seem more believable. Anna grinned, and there was so much bitterness in that grin that we all froze, not knowing where to put ourselves. Ivan, sitting in his seat, turned even paler, and I could see his panic starting to set in. Apparently, he didn't expect his fishing to be the topic of the evening. But Natalia must have been in the mood for a serious conversation, because she just started. Yes, my dears, this great angler was coming home without a fish, but with such fatigue as if he had fought a shark. And I'd put up with it all if it weren't for one thing. Someone in this house had to tell the truth, not hide behind false excuses. She paused, looking at us, at the guests, as if making sure her words hit right on target. And you know what the funny thing is? She continued with a cold chuckle. That's not his only weakness. Ivan is certainly a master at being a model husband in public, but when we're alone together, all that mask falls off. He doesn't just have fishing, he has a whole collection of, yes, I would say a collection of love affairs. And you know what? I know every one of them. And then Ivan couldn't stand it any longer, rushed out of his chair, trying to interrupt this monologue, but Anna didn't even notice him. She was already on a wave, and there was simply no stopping her. Remember Kate from your job? She tossed at him with a chuckle without raising her voice. Did you think I wouldn't recognize? Ah, how you were sure all those business trips would go unnoticed. Well, Ivan, in case you were wondering, you failed in your attempts to hide the truth 6 months ago. I saw Ivan twitch as if he'd been punched, but Anna didn't stop. She was already revealing the cards, one by one, not paying attention to her husband's reaction. The guests sat in silence. Someone was already starting to furtively look at his watch, but the atmosphere was so heated that no one dared to leave. And do you know what surprises me the most? She continued. Not the fact that he's cheating, that frankly, stopped bothering me a long time ago. And the way he looks at himself in the mirror every morning, sure his lies will never come out. Funny, isn't it? And that's when the fun part began. The guests began to look around at each other. It was becoming unbearable to sit in this heat, but no one dared to leave. And honestly, I tell you, curiosity prevailed. Everyone wanted to know how it would end. And Anna, as if getting courage from the very fact that everyone was listening to her, continued, and it's not only cheating. Do you think that's the end of it? No, my dears. The fact that he's trying to be an alpha male in front of you is really just a facade. Ivan, as a husband, not only fails in family life, but even in the most trivial things, finances, work, responsibility, it's all just an empty sound to him. Ivan's eyes were darting around the room. He already realized that there was no way to control the situation. His face was stained with shame and anger, but he sat there, trying to maintain at least an outward calm. I knew, however, that everything was boiling inside him. Let's remember how our Superman once almost jeopardized our budget with his idiotic investments. Anna smirked, clearly enjoying the situation. Yes, friends, this man who runs everything so confidently lost our savings in 3 days, because he decided he was going to be a great businessman. And what did he do afterward? Nothing. He came home and quietly transferred all the bills to me. I couldn't believe my ears. Anna was revealing such details of their life that even I, their friend, was getting embarrassed. But she didn't stop. Does Ivan think I don't know about this? Or maybe he hopes I'll forgive him for everything. You wanted to make a fool of me, didn't you? She turned to him, and there was no more anger or irritation in her gaze. Just a cold, confident calm. But you know what, Ivan? You're wrong. And that's when she said the thing that finally broke him. I filed for divorce. A sepulchral silence reigned in the room. Everyone froze, including Ivan, who seemed to be in complete shock. The guests didn't know where to look. It was as if they all wanted to become invisible at the same time. Anna spoke calmly, as if it was just a formality, like she was discussing the weather. Yeah, honey. You think this is all a joke? No, the papers are already signed and all you have to do is pack your things. Tomorrow, when everyone leaves, you won't be here. And at this point, I have to admit, even I couldn't believe my ears. Ivan sat there as if he had been hit on the head with a hammer, unable to even make a peep. Until that moment, he had probably still hoped that the situation would somehow go away, that Anna would change her mind or at least be embarrassed to talk about it in front of the guests. But here it is, not only not shy, but right in front of everyone decides to dot the dots. How come? You can't just ruin everything. For the first time all evening, Ivan squeezed out some words. But they sounded pathetic, not at all like the master who had just slapped his wife in front of everyone. Anna looked at him calmly. Ruin it? Ivan, you ruined everything yourself a long time ago. Have you not noticed how our marriage has been cracking at the seams for a long time? Do you think I haven't seen you abuse me for years? How you insult me, humiliate me, and in front of everyone. You're the one who ruined it, not me. I just decided that I won't take it anymore. The guests sat in complete shock. It seemed that even the most impassive began to twitch inside. The atmosphere in the room was heated to the limit. Ivan tried to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. No one expected such a turn, and I certainly didn't. Ivan, if you want me to keep pretending that everything is fine with us, you should have at least not hit me in front of the guests, Natasha added sarcastically. But it's too late now. Everyone has seen everything, so the mask is gone. Pack your things and leave. And if you want to try to make another scene, be my guest, but know that you have nothing else to control. Ivan finally stood up, clearly unable to take this blow. He abruptly threw his napkin on the table, about to leave the room, but before he did, he squeezed out, "You're going to regret this." But Anna only looked at him with a slight chuckle. "I don't regret anything anymore." Ivan, unable to find any more words, left the room, and we were all left in stunned silence. The guests were silent, not knowing what to do next. Someone was about to leave, but Natasha gestured them to stop. No, stay. Now we can have dinner in peace," she said with such calmness that it was clear to me that this evening was the beginning of a new life for her. And you know what the best part was? No one even remembered where it all started. After Ivan left, the room was silent, so deafening that you could hear the drops of wine dripping down the glasses. Everyone sat as if on a powder keg, waiting to see what would happen next. But Anna, as if nothing had happened, she calmly sat down at the table, corrected her forks, the very ones that had started the whole circus, and smiled as if she hadn't just destroyed her marriage in front of everyone. "Well folks, dinner's still on, right?" Her voice was so calm that some of us even thought maybe this was all some kind of weird dream. But no, Anna was clearly serious. She poured wine, raised toasts, and somehow managed to keep the conversation going as if nothing had happened. But the guests, of course, couldn't just carry on. Maria, Ivan and Anna's neighbor, was the first one who couldn't stand it. She, frankly speaking, had always been a bit chatty, and here her curiosity got the best of her. "Anna, you're so crazy, of course. Have you really filed for divorce? Or is this just to teach him a lesson?" Anna, not taking her eyes off her dish, nodded calmly. "Yes, Maria, I really did. The papers are already at the lawyer's office. Ivan has himself to blame for this. How much more can we put up with? I'm not ironclad." The rest of us were sitting on pins and needles. On the one hand, they wanted to keep the conversation going, on the other hand, who knew how it would turn out? But Anna was clearly in the mood to talk. "All this time I thought I could fix everything," she continued, "that we still had a chance. But you see, Maria, when you've been suppressed and humiliated for years, and you put up with it, at some point you just realize you can't take it anymore. And this blow today was a signal for me. It was like somebody said, 'That's it, that's enough.'" Maria nodded, and her eyes glittered with curiosity, but she held back from asking too many questions. But then George, Ivan's friend from work, who had been sitting silent until then, intervened. He decided to support his comrade, although he clearly did not understand the whole situation. "Well, Anna, maybe you're overreacting? All men aren't perfect after all. Yes, but that's no reason to divorce. You think again. You've been together for so many years." Anna gave him a look of contempt. "George, do you really think it was all about one punch? No, it was just the finishing touch. Do you know how long I've turned a blind eye to his behavior? How often do you go fishing with him, by the way? Remember when he told you how his boat capsized and you almost drowned? Funny thing is, it turns out he was in a hotel with another woman at the same time. So maybe you should think about who you're supporting there, too." George looked embarrassed, mumbled something inaudible, and fell silent. It was obvious that he had not expected such a turn. Anna continued, "You see, guys, we all have our limits. I tolerated, but that's it now. And no amount of entreaties will help. Tonight, it was the last act in his play where I was in a supporting role. Each of us felt that this evening was going to be much more than just dinner. And you know what? Deep down, I was glad that Anna had finally decided to take matters into her own hands." After Anna's words, there was silence in the room again, but it was different. The tension faded away, replaced by a mixture of surprise and a strange relief. It was as if we all realized that this evening had become not just a family conflict, but a moment of truth for Anna. At first no one knew what to say. The guests sat around, looking at each other, trying to figure out what to do next. Anna, however, seemed to know exactly how to continue the evening. She calmly brought her glass to her lips again, took a small sip, and looked at all of us. "You know, guys," she began, "I always thought that family life was something sacred, that you had to sacrifice everything for your family. But at some point you realize that sacrifice turns into slavery. When every day you are made to feel worthless, when you are manipulated, controlled, when you no longer live your own life, but just exist for the sake of another person, that's not a family, that's a prison." We all listened to her as if hypnotized. Natasha spoke calmly, without hysterics, without unnecessary emotions, but every word of hers penetrated like a bullet. I put up with it for a long time. I thought it was my cross to bear, that it was meant to be. But you know, at one point I just realized, if I don't take a step to the side, this life will just eat me up. Ivan, she continued, raising an eyebrow, wasn't always like this, of course. He used to be different. But over time, he started to turn into the man you all saw today. And yes, it wasn't the first slap, if you must know. It was just the last straw. It was hard to hear, even though I already knew a lot about Anna's life. But like that, publicly, in front of everyone, she'd laid out all the cards, showing me how far their problems had gone. Here, to my surprise, Stasi, Ivan's older sister, took the floor. She, as it turned out, had also known about many things for a long time, but kept quiet. "Anna, I've always suspected that things weren't going so smoothly for you," she began, a little tentatively. "But it never seemed to me that things were this bad. If I knew, maybe I could help." Anna looked at her with a slight sadness, but answered firmly, "Stasi, believe me, you couldn't have changed anything. It was my choice to put up with it all. But now I have made a different choice. I will no longer remain silent, and I will no longer sacrifice myself to make someone else feel important." The guests began to talk quietly, discussing what they had heard. It was obvious that for many people this evening was a real discovery. Some were getting ready to leave, but Natasha wasn't finished yet. "And now," she said, rising from her seat, "let's all close this evening on a good note. After all, I have a new life ahead of me now, and I don't want to start it with sad memories." With these words she poured a glass of wine again and proposed a toast to the new chapter of her life, which she was starting without Ivan. We raised our glasses in support, realizing that Natasha deserved better. And in that moment, as I drank that toast, I realized, sometimes one night can change a whole life, and that night was it for Natasha. And for Ivan? Well, I think he'll remember it as the night he lost everything he thought was his. The guests, strangely enough, were beginning to come to their senses after what they'd heard. Though I could sense that many were still in a state of shock, especially those who had previously thought Ivan was the perfect husband and a reliable man. Tension still hung in the air, but Anna with her calmness as if removed it layer by layer. I was one of the last to leave, watching as people gradually began to pack up and leave. Some tried to mumble words of encouragement, others just nodded silently and left, not knowing how to react to such an emotional storm. But Anna kept everything under control, as if it was her evening of triumph, not parting with the past. Maria walked over to her and tried to hug her, but Anna gently but firmly stopped her. "Thank you, Maria. I understand completely, but right now I need to be alone." Although it sounded polite, there was an iron determination in her voice. She had already taken the first step toward her freedom, and now she didn't need pity or empty words of comfort. When the last guest left the apartment, Anna closed the door, slowly walked to the table and sat down across from me. We sat in silence, and I realized that despite her outward calmness, a hurricane of feelings was boiling inside her. She had finally let out all the stuff that had been building up over the years, and now she needed to process it. "You know," Anna finally broke the silence, "I thought I would feel devastated when this happened. But no. I feel free, you know? I'm finally free. And no one is going to make me feel worthless anymore." I nodded. There was a confidence in her voice that hadn't been there before. Anna hadn't just decided to end her relationship with Ivan, she'd started a new life. And though her path wouldn't be easy, she'd already taken the most important step. "Aren't you afraid Ivan will try to come back?" I asked, unable to help myself. She grinned, leaning back in her chair. "He will try. I know him. He won't be able to let go that easily. But I don't care now. Even if he comes back, This marriage is already dead to me. And no matter what he does, I'm not going back. Those words of hers sounded so confident that I honestly didn't doubt her resolve. She could handle it. I could see it in her eyes. Anna would never let anyone else run her life again. Anna sat across from me, and in her eyes I saw something I rarely see in someone who has just gone through such a painful ordeal: determination and even some kind of release. This was more than just a divorce or a breakup with Ivan. It was her journey back to herself, to the identity she had long hidden beneath a layer of family responsibilities, domestic problems, and her husband's pressures. You know, she said, pouring herself some more wine, I thought for so many years that I had to put up with everything for the sake of my family. I was sure that if I left, it would be my failure. But now I realize that my failure was that I put up with it for so long. That I let him turn my life into something like his own circus. She glanced at me, a note of regret in her voice. You've been my friend all this time, and you've probably seen more than I wanted to show. But I'll tell you, I don't regret anything except not leaving sooner. How many opportunities one missed, how many times I could have been happy but chose to suffer instead. I nodded, not knowing what to say back. It was one of those moments when words seemed to be unnecessary. Anna knew what she was saying, and she didn't need confirmation from me or anyone else. She had already made her choice. Now what? I asked after a short pause. What are your plans? Natasha smiled, and there wasn't a trace of sadness in her smile. I'm going to live for myself now. No more sacrifices, no more compromises. I haven't allowed myself to even think about what I want for a long time. And now I have a chance to fix that. I could see that she was sincere. Anna was really ready for a new life, and she was no longer intimidated by loneliness or a future without Ivan. You know the most interesting thing I realized? She continued, taking another sip of wine. I'm not afraid anymore. I'm no longer afraid of being alone. That fear used to keep me caged, but now I realize, it's better to be alone than with someone who makes you miserable. And no matter what happens next, I will never again let someone else run my life. Those words were the final point in our conversation. Anna finally got up from her seat and looked at her watch. It's time to call it a night, she said, holding out her hand to me. Thank you for being here. But now I need to be alone. I have a lot of plans ahead of me. I shook her hand and walked out of the apartment. And you know, as I was leaving, I suddenly realized that Anna would never again be the woman I used to know. She was finally free, not just from Ivan, but from all the shackles that held her back. And this evening was her first step toward a new, free life. After I left Anna's apartment, I had one thought on my mind: what would happen next? This divorce situation, her determination, Ivan's exposure to the guests, it was all like a storm, and I realized that the consequences would not be long in coming. Anna might be free from the shackles of her marriage, but there were difficult days ahead of her, and perhaps even serious difficulties. It was several days before I contacted her again. She was, strangely enough, surprisingly calm. It seemed that by letting go of Ivan and their toxic relationship, she had begun to find inner peace. But I realized, this was only the beginning. You know, she told me over the phone when we agreed to meet for coffee, since that night, it's like a stone has fallen from my soul. But I'm not naive. I realize that there will be difficulties ahead. You can't get off Ivan so easily. When we met, Anna looked completely different. She seemed alive, full of energy, which I hadn't seen in her for a long time. Before, she looked tired, depressed, as if she were carrying the weight of their marriage on her shoulders. Now, in front of me sat a woman who had finally chosen herself. Ivan hasn't shown up yet? I asked, knowing he was clearly not someone who would just give up. Anna nodded, smiling. Of course he's shown up. Tried to come over, asked to talk. Said it was all a mistake, that he was ready to make things right. But you know what the best part is? I don't feel anything for him anymore. Not even anger. Just emptiness. She took a sip of coffee, her face calm, but I could see that there were still emotions bubbling up inside her that she was trying to control. Are you sure this is the end? I asked, unable to resist. I mean, he's probably going to try something else. You know him. Yes, she replied. But I'm different now. I'm no longer the Anna he manipulated. If he tries to come back, I'll be ready. I'm not afraid anymore. We sat in the cafe for a long time, discussing her plans for the future. Anna was going to take care of herself, her career, finally start living for herself, not for someone else. But I still felt that there was another round ahead of her with Ivan, because people like him don't leave without a fight. And as soon as I thought about it, the very next day Anna called me with unexpected news. When I heard her voice on the phone the next day, it sounded worried, but not scared. It was something between mild irritation and determination, and honestly, I knew right away, Ivan was on the horizon again. "You won't believe what happened," she began with a slight chuckle. "That man. He just doesn't understand the word end." "What again?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Came over yesterday, late at night. Rang the doorbell at first, as if everything was normal. Asked me to let him in, saying he wanted to talk. But when I said no, he started knocking, demanding, almost breaking in. I didn't open the door, of course. I just ignored him. But here's what's interesting, his words. First he tried to apologize, then he threatened, and then, what do you think he did? I couldn't imagine how absurd it could have gotten to. Well, what? He started telling me how I wouldn't make it without him. That I wouldn't be able to live alone, wouldn't be able to support myself. That he was always the one who decided everything, and I was always nothing, according to him. Her voice sounded bitter, but I sensed it didn't hurt her like it used to. "And what did you do?" I asked, even though I already knew Anna was unlikely to give in under such pressure. "I just laughed," she replied, and there was a note of release in her voice. "Do you know how funny that was? I used to always believe that my life would fall apart without him, and now that I'm finally free, he's trying to scare me, like I'm still that weak woman. But I'm not scared anymore. And you know what else? I called the police." This twist surprised me, but also pleased me. "And how did that go?" "The police came quickly, and that's where the real show started. Ivan tried to talk to them as usual, as the master of the situation. But you know how such stories end. They just kicked him out the door and warned him that if he tried to come to me again, there would be other consequences." I chuckled. Imagining Ivan standing in front of the cops, losing his confidence, was almost funny. "So, how did he react?" "Was in shock. He probably thought I was going to beg him to stay, like I did before. But it's different now. He's gone, and I'm sure this is his last such visit." We continued talking for a while longer, discussing her next steps. Anna, despite all this history, was determined to move forward. Her plans included work, new hobbies, and finally the freedom she had long been deprived of. But despite her calmness, I still felt that this was not the end. Ivan, by all accounts, was not ready to let her go so easily. And this visit, though it had ended in shame for him, could only be the beginning of his attempts to regain control. "So what are you now?" I asked as the conversation came to an end. "Now." Natalia grinned. "Now I'm preparing for a new life. But if he tries anything again, I already know what to do. I'm not the same woman I was before." And in her voice I heard a determination I'd never noticed before. A few weeks passed, and Anna's life began to gradually get better. She was actively working on herself, got the job she had long dreamed of, and seemed to feel more confident than ever. We called periodically, and each time I heard less and less tension in her voice. It seemed as if Ivan could no longer affect her life. But, as is so often the case, it wasn't that simple. One evening when I was on my way home, Anna called me. I could tell from her voice that something was wrong. "He showed up again," she said briefly, and I heard her sigh nervously. "What is it this time?" I asked, even though I knew Ivan wouldn't go away that easily. "He started playing the victim," she continued, not hiding her irritation. "Came to my work, waited for me at the entrance. At first he said he missed me, that he made a mistake, that he wanted it all back. And then when I didn't react, he started telling me how bad his life was without me, how I broke him. He's not threatening anymore, but he's trying to make me feel sorry for him. You know? He thinks that if I'm not afraid, at least I'll take pity on him and let him back in." "And what did you do?" I asked, though I guessed Anna wasn't going to give in. "I just walked away. Walked past him like he was nothing. And he stood there yelling after me that I was soulless, that I had betrayed him, that no one would ever love me again." There was a sadness in her voice, but not the sadness that used to be associated with pain, but rather regret at what the man she once loved had become. "Are you okay?" I asked, realizing that scenes like this could throw anyone off balance. "Yeah, I'm fine," she answered firmly. "I'm just tired of it. You know, he won't let me live. First he threatened me, now he's trying to pander. What's next?" I was silent for a moment, not knowing what to say. Anna continued to fight for her freedom, but Ivan was clearly not going to give up so easily. "You have to do something more serious," I finally said. "He won't stop until you put him in his place for good. Call the police, ask for a restraining order. You can't keep living in fear that he'll show up anywhere, anytime." She was silent for a few seconds before quietly replying, "I know. But I didn't think I'd have to come to this. I wanted to believe he would understand and leave on his own." "Anna, he doesn't understand. And he won't until you show him that this is the end of him." We talked some more, and Anna promised to think about going to the police. But I sensed she didn't want to do that, still hoping the situation would resolve itself. A few days later, she called again. This time her voice was firm, and I knew immediately that she had made her decision. "I've done it," she said. "I filed a police report. I have a restraining order on him now." I breathed a sigh of relief. It was the right move, and now Ivan wouldn't be able to approach her so easily. But something in her voice told me this wasn't over. A few days after getting the restraining order, Anna called me again. But this time there was not anxiety in her voice, but something calmer, almost confident. I knew right away, something had happened, but it sounded like she was finally taking full control of the situation. "You're not going to believe this," she began when I answered the phone. "Today, Ivan tried to reach out to me again through mutual acquaintances. Apparently, he's finally realized that he can't approach me directly anymore, and now he's trying to use other avenues." "What's he come up with this time?" I asked, sensing this was another one of his manipulative moves. "Well, you know, it's a classic. He contacted a mutual friend of ours and started complaining to her, saying I left him for no reason, ruined our happy family. And he asked her to convince me to take it all back. Basically, an attempt to push through pity again." "And what friend?" I asked, even though I knew Anna was unlikely to give in easily to such manipulation. "Oh, she's a smart girl," Anna grinned. Straight up told him she wasn't going to get involved and backed me up. But here's what amazes me the most. Ivan is still convinced that if I press the right points, I'll forget and forgive everything. Her calmness was impressive. A few months ago, such attempts by Ivan would have brought her to tears, but now she not only understood his manipulations, but knew how to cut them off. "Do you realize now that there's no way for him to regain control?" I asked, sensing that she finally believed in her power. "Yes, I realized that a long time ago, but now it's become obvious to me. He'll probably still try to influence for a while through mutual acquaintances, through pity or threats. But I am no longer the Anna he knew. And he won't be able to control my life anymore." We were silent for a while, thinking about what she had said. I realized that she was finally out of his grasp, but I knew that people like Ivan rarely gave up without one last try. Inwardly, I expected him to take another step, something that could be his last desperate move. "I'm glad you finally put him in his place," I said, feeling relieved for her. "Now you have a chance to live your life without his constant threats and pressure." "Yes," Anna replied, her voice light and confident again. "Now I can look forward and think for myself. And you know what the most amazing thing is? I don't feel anger anymore. I just don't feel anything for him anymore. He's in the past." I heard the freedom in her voice, the freedom she'd been working toward for so long. But in spite of all this, I felt that the final point had not yet been reached. Ivan was probably preparing his last move, and that move, I was sure, would not be long in coming. And a few days later Anna called me again, and her voice was again anxious. Anna's call took me by surprise, but as soon as I heard her voice, I realized that Ivan was back on the horizon. This time, however, her tone wasn't anxious or scared, more like annoyed and a little ironic. "Well, can you imagine? This man can't put up with it at all," she began, and it was clear from her voice that she simply couldn't believe how far Ivan was willing to go. "Today he decided to put on a real show. Right in front of my house." "What happened?" I asked, even though I knew Ivan would once again go overboard. "I leave the house in the morning, as usual, and what do I see? Ivan is standing there with some flowers, and a poster too. A poster. It says in big letters something like, 'I'm sorry, Anna, I'll make it up to you,'" she said, mockingly mocking him. Standing in the middle of the courtyard, people are walking around him, looking at him, someone is taking pictures on their phone. And what do you think he does next? He starts reciting poetry. Imagine our Ivan, who was always so sure of his rightness, now reads some pathetic poems, obviously taken from the internet. Apparently he thought it would move me. I could literally hear her chuckle through the phone. But there was also something bitter in those words. Her once strong and confident husband now looked downright pathetic in his attempts to win her back. "Did you approach him?" I asked, imagining this ridiculous picture of a grown man standing in front of the house waving a placard. "Of course not," Anna snorted. "I just walked past without even glancing in his direction. Like he was nothing. Saw how stunned he was when he realized his grand plan didn't work. And to be honest, everyone on the street was already starting to laugh. At some point he realized that he looked like a complete idiot and started to pack up, but before that he yelled several times that I was his only love and that he couldn't live without me. I couldn't contain my laughter. Ivan, who always kept himself in the image of a stern man, was now standing in the middle of the street with a placard and flowers, trying to win Natasha back in such a ridiculous way. It was a real down moment. "So what, he just walked away?" I asked, trying to figure out exactly how this show ended. "Yeah, when he realized that no one was reacting and that I didn't even dignify him with a look, he just rolled up his crafts and left. I think he was expecting some dramatic effect, tears or at least dialogue. But nothing came out." Anna was silent for a few seconds, as if pondering how low Ivan had fallen. This was not the strong and oppressive man who used to control her life. Now in front of her was a man who seemed to have lost all sense of dignity. "You know what's most ironic?" she continued. "I used to think that Ivan was unshakable, that he would always dominate, keep me under control. And now that he's lost control, he doesn't even know how to behave. His whole mask is just a void. He doesn't understand anything, doesn't know how to live any other way." "He's pathetic," I said briefly, and Anna nodded. "Yes, he's pathetic," she repeated, and there wasn't so much contempt in her voice as sadness. "And the sad thing is, he'll never realize it. He'll stay in that role, pathetic, trying to evoke pity. But that's not my problem anymore." We said goodbye, and I thought about how quickly the image of a man who once seemed strong and invincible could crumble. Ivan was now just a pathetic ghost of his past, and this role seemed to be the only one he could play. But knowing Anna, I understood, she would never let him back into her life again. With each such pathetic attempt to regain control, Ivan only lost himself more. After our last conversation, I realized that Ivan's story had come to its logical conclusion. He had shown himself in all his pathetic self, and even Natalia, who had been afraid of his anger and influence for so many years, now looked at him as a man who had lost all power. Anna had finally gained her freedom. She no longer saw Ivan as the threat that had once made her obey and keep silent. Now he was no more than a memory to her, which was slowly erased with every desperate step he took. And though Ivan tried to win her back through threats, pity, attempts to appease her, and even ridiculous gestures, he never succeeded. Anna called me one day, just to chat, as she had before. Her voice sounded calm, confident, and even joyful. She talked about her new plans, about how she was starting a new page in her life, without Ivan, without fear, and most importantly, without that feeling of depression that had haunted her for so many years. "You know," she said at the end of the conversation, "I thought I could never feel free. But now I've realized, true freedom isn't when someone walks out of your life. It's when you choose to leave." And those words were the whole point. Anna was no longer hostage to Ivan or her past. She was free not only from him, but also from the shackles that had once held her in fear. As for Ivan, he had vanished from her life as suddenly as he had tried to return. Now he was but a faint reflection of the man who had once held power over her. But that didn't matter anymore. The story ended the way it should have. Anna had found her freedom, and Ivan was a thing of the past. And looking at her now, I knew that this ending was exactly what she deserved.